Um, Again, as we usually do, this time we focus in on certain things in the Pasha of the week and try to get some directives for ourselves, something that clarifies our own lives and helps us to do and to focus in our own activities. This parsha is called A Chayey Sorah, as you know, which means the life of Sorah. And it's very odd. The one time the Rebbe pointed out, this parsha is called the life of Sorah. There's there's nothing about the life of Sorah in this parsha. Absolutely nothing. It says how Sorah died. It doesn't say anything about Sorah's life. What does it speak about? It speaks about essentially the fact that Avram acquired a piece of land in Eretz Yisrael, the first piece of land that was acquired in Eretz Yisrael by Avram, Moraz HaMachpelah, for the burial of Sarah. And it speaks about the shidduch, the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. How is it called Chayey Sorah? So the insight in this is, you remember, as we spoke about last week, that Sorah is the one who insisted that Ishmael and Yitzchak must be separated. No matter the fact that Ishmael may be Avram's son and may have learned a lot of good things, but there's no partnership there. There's no similarity whatsoever. She went very drastic about it. Send him out from the house. Because Yitzchak is in a different category. He has to be completely pure. He cannot be involved with Ishmael's ideas. This was one, as we discussed, this was one of the nisyonos of Avram. This was Sorah's insight. This was so much Sorah's insight, uniquely for Sorah, that Avram had a difficulty with it, until Hashem himself told him, do what Sorah told you to do. What is it that made it such a difficult insight that Sorah was the one who saw Avram had a difficulty with it? This repeats itself, really, this principle repeats itself in Jewish history, and at many intervals and many instances. During the desert, during the time of Kabbalah Torah, during the time of the Meraglim and so forth, that Avraham, no question, Avraham was a Ma'amin. A Ma'amin means he had absolute faith in the Meibashin. Nevertheless, Avraham's mode of Avodah was through Seichel, as we discussed 2 weeks ago, as I recall it, that Avraham actually found God through an investigative process, intellectual process. Sorah and women in general, throughout our history, had this direct insight. And as we know that throughout the desert, all the difficulties that Eden went through, there were only the men involved, the women were not involved in that. In the time of the Meraglim, the women were not involved. In the time of the Egel, the women were not involved. And every other time. This was Sorah's thing. This was Sorah's insistence, clarity of vision. This principle of Sorah, this is A Chayey Sorah. This is Sorah's major accomplishment. And in this parsha, we see how she really accomplished it. That's why it's called A Chayey Sorah. Because what happened in this parsha? There are two things, as I mentioned. One is that Avram acquired a piece of land for the burial of Sarah. And the other is the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. In both of these, this principle of Sarah is reflected. When Avram came to the Bnei Ches, I'm sure you learned the Parsha, and he said, I want to buy the Moraz HaMachpelah from Ephraim. And the way he introduced himself to this, if you remember, Rashi explains it. What did he say? Gave it a Shabbat. What is a Geir? A Geir means a stranger, a visitor, an outsider. I don't really belong here. Then he says, V'toshav. No, but I'm an old timer. I really belong here. I own it. How is it that he's a ger and a teishav? It's either a ger or a teishav. So Rashi explains very briefly the Sinyan that Avram said to them that I'd be willing to deal with you as a ger if you would consent to sell it to me. But otherwise, I'm going to take it al pidin, because Hashem promised the land to me, and I'm going to take it. So there's a sikha from Rebbe when he discusses this whole debate in great detail. Asks many questions. Why did Avram want to buy it to as a ger, wanted to go on in Teisha? But I want to come to the point that I want to focus in on. The Rebbe explains that the relationship between the Jewish people and the land of Eretz Yisrael, there are two levels. One is the practical ownership. They live on the land, and they own the land, and they cultivate it, and they run it. The other is that the land is inherently theirs because God gave it to them. In which respect, in that respect, even when they are off the land, it's also their land. It's not related to the external, the facts, so to speak, of the practical facts. This is a God-given a relationship, God-given land. This cannot change. And thus Avram came to them and he said, practically speaking, I haven't taken over the land yet. That's why I'm a ger. But you should also know that really inherently it is mine from a completely different perspective. And the Rebbe explains in that sikha, which I said I don't want to go into this, how this would mean that Avram can get the Moras and Machpelah. Coming back to the point that we want to discuss here. This principle that there is such a thing as ownership of the land, even though, practically speaking, you have nothing to do with it. This is a principle that does not have a basis, so to speak, does not have merit in rational thinking, in practical thinking. You're not there. The other people are living there. And yet, this became a principle of Jewish thought, a principle of Jewish life. Throughout the Golus, throughout the exile. We are in Golus now 2,000 years. And before that we were also in Golus several times. We always refer to Eretz Yisrael as our land. Not as our land as a wish, or we wish to have our land. No, this is our land because this is a godly relationship, a godly truth. It's an absolute. It's called an absolute phenomenon, not dependent on circumstance. This is A Chayey Sorah. Sorah said, "Yeah, Yishmael is a good kid. He's also going to school. He's also grow up in Avram's house. Yeah, he's different than Yitzchak, but listen, they'll learn from each other." Sorah said, no. It's nothing to do with what they learn. There is a categorical difference. They're two different people completely. They have different destinies, they have different purposes. In those days, in the time of Avram, Yitzchak, Yankiv, and later on, in those years, in those generations, there were prophets of other nations. There were Nevi from other nations, not only Jews. As a matter of fact, Bilam, you will learn later on, I'm sure many of you have learned already, Bilam was a prophet that Hashem spoke to him. And yet, there is no parallel between Bilam and any of our prophets. No parallel whatsoever. I want to go to the next point, and then we'll encapsulate and kind of bring it to us. The next point is that when it came to marrying Yitzchak, again, this is also where Sorah's principles came in. When it came to marrying Yitzchak, what was the principle that Avram said to Eliezer? He said to him two things. Number one, Yitzchak is not to leave Eretz Yisrael. And number two, that Yitzchak will not marry one of the Canaanites. This is a categorical principle. It's not going to happen. So then Eliezer came back to Avram and said, how am I going to do it? How am I going to accomplish? I'm going to go to a strange land. People, yes, they're from your family, but they don't know anything what's doing with you. They don't know Yitzchak. They don't know anything. And I'm going to tell to them, listen, I came to get a wife for Yitzchak. They left me out of town. How are they ever going to consent to such a thing? Doesn't make any sense. What did Abraham answer him? What did Abraham say to him?
Where's your opinion?
No. That's not what
Abraham
Abraham
said
said.
if not, if Sarah come back.
Abraham said,
What happens?
this is not in your hand. Hashem is going to make it happen. Yes, it doesn't make any sense. That's what he said. Right? Hashem Elokei Hashomayim, Asher Lokochanim Beisovim Beisomeretz Meladeti, Hashem who took me away from my father's house and who set me aside from all other people, He is the one who's going to make it happen. You just do your thing. In other words, what was the declaration there by Avraham? Declaration there, it's a very important thing that we have to reflect and we'll discuss it. This is not something that you are going to accomplish by your deeds. You're going to do everything that's necessary. As you learn, as a matter of fact, in the Pasha today, that Yishmael took 10 camels, he wanted to show off what he's got and all that. This is just an external enticement. But practically, the reality of it is that none of this was the instrument by which he accomplished it. Because when he came to Lavan and Besuel, and he told them his story, they didn't say, "Oh, I see your master is so wealthy and is so gifted. Oh, sure, take Rivki." They didn't say that. What did they say?
Wait a couple of years.
They said, "May Hashem yotza hadova." This whole thing is a godly plot. It's not something that happened naturally at all. Hashem yotza hadova. They didn't consent to send Rivki because of all the presentations that Eliezer made. It's nothing to do with any of that. This again is A Chayey Sorah. In other words, we go, we do things totally irrationally, so to speak, practically speaking. But this is what this represents, so to speak, a deeper truth, the principle of the Jewish people, and it's going to happen because that's the way Hashem is going to make it happen. Because that's the way it has to happen. I want to tell you a little episode, a little story, on a much lesser scale, but it illustrates the principle of it. This was a story in the time of the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek, right? The third Lubavitcher Rebbe. There was a Yid in the market who had with him a lot of money, not his money, other people's money, people who gave him money to go to the market and bring produce and bring their merchandise for him. He was like the middleman, and this was his parnos. He was rewarded for this service. And he came to the market. All of a sudden, he touches his pocket, and he saw that he lost the money. He lost this money. This was a tragic thing for him. There was absolutely no way that he can ever pay this money back. and his agony, he fainted. And so they saw a man fall down in the middle of the market. He fainted. Everybody came, and then there became a big ado, a big tumult, and they poured water over him. They brought him back to himself. As soon as he woke up, he fainted again. Because he thought, he realized, as soon as he started thinking what his situation is, he couldn't take it. And this happened several times. So finally they ran to the Tzemach Tzedek, they ran to the Rebbe. They told him this story. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, whisper in his ear that the money was found. Tell him that the money was found. So they did that. They whispered several times the money was found. And so he slowly woke up. And as a matter of fact, there was a man over there that declared and says, I found the money. It was a more involved story than that. I found the money. In any case, he got the money back. So then they went to the Tzemach Tzedek, and they said to Tzemach Tzedek, he said, you claim that you don't perform miracles. Wasn't this a miracle? This was a kind of an ongoing declaration of Tzemach Tzedek that he doesn't perform miracles. Isn't this a miracle? Tzemach Tzedek said it wasn't a miracle at all. We have a klal, which means we have a principle that Hashem does not give a person a test that he cannot possibly withstand. That is beyond his capacity. Everybody understands the capacity, right? Since this man was being awakened several times and he could not get himself out of it, it was obvious to me that he cannot, this is a test beyond his capability. And he cannot possibly live with this. And therefore I knew that this could not be a real test. I knew that the money must have been found. It couldn't be really lost. Because this would constitute a test beyond this capacity, which is contrary to the principle that we declared. In other words, what do we say? There are rational ways, there are logical ways that the world runs. But there are also principles. There are principles. There are principles how Hashem leads the world and how Yidden live in the world. These principles, if need be, they completely ignore, so to speak, the logical process and it follows through on the basis of the principle. Like in the case of Rivka. It didn't make any sense that they should send Rivka with Eliezer. It didn't make any rational sense. There was no way that they wouldn't, because that's the way it has to be. Now I'd like to bring it back to us over here. We should understand our own lives. There's no question that everyone has to do everything that they possibly can in order to accomplish what they need to accomplish. Let us talk first of all about learning. You're learning Torah. Torah is not a worldly science, something that you can relate to, so to speak, on a practical and a simple level. Torah is godly wisdom. Everything in Torah is godly wisdom. Even the simple principles are godly wisdom. How do we expect a human being to understand Torah? Not only to understand Torah, but to learn it and to retain it, to remember it and to know it, and to live with it. The answer is that, in fact, in the process of learning Torah, it is not just merely our seichel that learns it. The reason that we're capable of learning Torah is because we have a neshama. The neshama inherently relates and feels at home, so to speak, feels and recognizes a personal relationship of this truth. And that's how it gets absorbed. Even though that definitely it requires work and one has to learn and so forth, but the bottom line is, what happens is that it sticks. The Torah sticks to the Yid. The Gemara says, there's a pasuk. You say every day in davening. In the Volotzi, you say in davening, Ani zois brisi oisam omer Hashem lo yomushu mipicho mipi zaracho mipi zaracho. There is a principle that the Rebbe has established in the world, in the Jewish world, that if there are 3 generations of Torah in a house, then it's guaranteed for the 4 future times. How is it guaranteed? Every person has to learn on his own. The answer is that the Torah it sticks to that house. It cleaves to it. It's not just the human effort that's involved. There was a Imam who became a Rav, who is now a Rav in Kfar Chabad. He was a big Rav. When he was learning in yeshiva, and the Rebbe wanted that he should become a Rav, so he complained to the Rebbe that he is learning and he forgets. He can't remember what he learns so well enough to be able to pass on a shiloh, as it comes. So the Rebbe said to him, you should not make any special effort to remember. You just learn. This is an important principle to understand. That when we learn Torah, it seems to us that we learn Torah because we logically understand what we're learning. The deeper truth is that it really makes sense much more deeply than we think. It is our nefesh, it is our soul that relates to it. This is where it is retained. This is where it really makes sense. If we make too much of remembering, so to speak, on the basis of what we understand, then it doesn't stick. We have to learn Torah, and it automatically seeps in, and it unites with our soul. Torah is something that you live with, not just you learn it and you know it. This is the principle of Geir v'Soisha v'Anoichi Yimach. Every Yid, especially us over here, we come to learn in Yeshiva, come to learn in Torah. We have to come to learn in Torah on the basis of these two principles. On the one hand, I'm first starting to learn. I don't know anything. And therefore I have to ask, and I have to have teachers, and I have to learn and repeat the learning and so forth. I'm learning, I'm like a stranger to it. But on the other hand, we must never really consider ourselves as real strangers. We must know that the Torah really belongs to us even before we learned it. Every Yid who starts learning Torah, he's a Toishov in the Torah. He inherited it, the whole Torah complete. And when he understands something, it is not just his superficial mind that understands it. The understanding goes all the way into when I say that there is Chochmah, Bina, V'das, and there is even deeper than that. The understanding that one has in Torah is something which encompasses, which touches the whole person. It's not even based on rationale. It makes sense. It's real. That's how we learn Torah. So while we're learning and we're struggling, I'm a ger, I don't know anything, I don't understand, at the same time, we know that we're at home. We're in our own domain. This is true, so to speak, idealistically, but this is also true practically. The success of learning Torah depends on both of these principles. On the one hand, we have to labor, we have to learn and work hard. On the other hand, we have to always remember and always develop that feeling that we're learning something that is our own, not something that is being given to us from outside. When we learn, I give you, just to illustrate the point. When we say, Breishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'oretz, that in the beginning God created the shamayim v'ha'oretz, yes, the Torah tells us this. I'm first learning it the first time, the Torah tells us this. God created the world, the shamayim, the heavens and the earth. But I also know it before I even learned it. And now, that which I'm learning connects and joins that which I've known all the time, without being aware of it. Because the truth of the Torah is a truth that the neshama knows automatically. And when we learn it, it connects to that which we inherently know without being aware of it. And that's when we unite with the Torah. The Torah that we learn is described. The Torah is called lechem u'mayim. It's called mozaim, food. Lechem u'mayim, bread and water. Just like when a person eats, and he eats the bread, and he chews it up, and he digests it, swallows it and digests it, and then this bread that was just a piece of bread that he bought in the store becomes part of him. He digests it and becomes part of him, and from this he lives. The Torah that we learn is exactly the same way. But in order that the Torah should become part of us, we have to be able to accept it internally. If we look at it from out as outsiders, this is like taking bread. A Chassid once described it. Like, imagine you take a loaf of bread and you tie it out around your stomach. Nothing's going to happen. It's not going to feed you. Nothing's going to happen. You have to put it in your mouth and you have to chew it up and digest it. And then it's going to give you health. The same is true regarding Torah. Torah gives us chayes, it gives us inspiration, it gives us life. It brings our neshama out. But in order that this should happen, you know, when a person eats, there are people that say, oh, I'm allergic to certain foods. What's allergy mean? Allergy means that his constitution, his organism rejects certain foods. It rejects it. It could be a healthy food, but it rejects it. Rejecting means it doesn't become one with it. And if it doesn't become one, then it becomes like a stranger, like a poison in his body. In order that the Torah should feed us, and we should derive the strength from it, it's not enough that we should just learn to know it. We have to recognize and accept and learn it as our own. That's when the Torah is able to merge with our own mind, with our own heart, with our own spirit, and really give us strength in life. There's another phenomenon in our parsha. There's actually one of the most marvelous questions that come up in our parsha, that everyone, all the Mefoshim, everyone is just looking for all kinds of answers, but it really eludes. Eludes means we can't put it down and get a good answer. On the question coming up in today's parsha, and there is a marvelous, profound answer by the Rebbe, which relates to everything that we spoke about today. The question is like this: the Torah tells us that when Yitzchak was born, it was an unusual phenomenon. That a man in those years. This was already, Rashi explains, this was already a time when people gave birth at the age of 30 and 40. And at 100 years, it was a miracle. At 90 years, it was a miracle. Such a miracle that the Torah makes a tremendous point about it. Over and over again. When Yitzchak was born, the whole world came joined in with Sorah and rejoicing with Sorah. Oh, what an occurrence. What an occurrence. Right? If you go to the end of today's parsha, after Yitzchak was married, this is the last parsha, maybe you learned it last year, but you learned it, it says, Avram married another woman after Sorah passed away. He married another wife. At that time, Avram was not 100. Because after the Akedah, and after Rivka, after Yitzchak married Rivka, Yitzchak was 40 years old when he married Rivka. And Avram was 100 when Yitzchak was born. So that means that Avram was at that time 140. Okay? Avram married another wife. And he had 6 sons with her. And no fuss is made. Nothing happened. It's perfectly natural. She bore him 6 sons. Each one of them is like a nation, What happened over here? So, as I said, there's all the Mephoshim, everybody speaks about it, trying to explaining one way or another. The Rebbe has a completely different approach to the whole thing, shedding light to the entire phenomenon. Before Yitzchak was born, Hashem came to Avraham and he said to him, I'm going to change your name from Avram to Avraham, and I'm going to change Sorah's name from Sorai to Sorah. And by this change of name, this will be instrumental of you being able to have a son, to have a child. What does one have to do with the other? And then furthermore, Yitzchak was Avram's son. He was part of the Jewish nation. What was the change in Avram's name? The change in Avram's name is that he was called Avraham rather than Avram. And the Pasuk, the Torah itself explains what's the difference. Why is it called Avraham? Anybody remember? Av hamoin goyim esaticha. Because I made you now a father for a multiple of nations. Not just a father for your own nation, but for all the nations. You're the father of the world. Av hamoin goyim esaticha. That's the meaning of the word of Avraham. And the same thing by Sorah and Sorai, the similar difference. Sorai means my master, and Sorah means a master of all. So the question is, what does one have to do with the other? Because Avram became a master of the whole world, and the father of all the nations. That's why Yitzchak was born. Yitzchak was Avram's son. The Rebbe explains that what is the Jewish nation about? The Jewish nation has a destiny and a task, not just for itself. The Jewish nation, everything that a Yid does affects the whole world. And ultimately, it is obligatory on the Jewish nation to teach the whole world about their obligations. That's what it says in the Rambam and on the Pasuk and so forth. Before Yitzchak was born, since Yitzchak was the first born into the Jewish nation, and the Jewish nation meant not just a private affair between Avram and Yitzchak, but this is a world affair. That that nation which is supposed to uplift the entire world. That nation is supposed to be born. Before that can happen, Avram had to be declared as the master of the world in order to facilitate this kind of birth. And so by Sorah. This is what the difficulty of the whole birth was. This is why it was delayed for such a long time. Because for Yitzchak's birth had to come after that Avram has reached that point when he was Avram. Before that it couldn't be. Now that Avram has reached this point, and now he already is Avraham, Av Hamoin Goyim, then there is no problem. He had 6 more nations. Avram is building the world. There is no obstacle anymore. Because this is Avram's function. Avram has reached, so to speak, the epitome of his function, to build the world and to transform the world. Again, coming back to us and also relating it to what we discussed before. We are sitting here in the yeshiva, right? We are blocked off by the four walls, and we're sitting and we're learning Torah. So, it would seem to us that what we are doing is something which is contained within these four walls. And the outside world, that's a different world. It has nothing to do with what we are doing here. The outside world doesn't understand what we are doing. And there is no way that we can correlate, bind up, connect the two. So we have to, this Pasha, A Chayey Sorah, tells us, we have to know that, like we said before, number one, gave a Teishov. You learn Torah as a Teishov, but you should know that it doesn't remain here between the four walls. Whatever you do here has an impact way beyond these four walls. The Torah is what sustains the world. The Torah that we're learning here, this sustains the world. This gives the world a meaning. This gives the world a purpose. This gives the world a spirit. And that's how the world can persist. Avraham, Av Hamoin Goyim. The Gemara says that Talmidei Chachomim who learn Torah, Talmidei Chachomim does not necessarily mean big scholars. It means even like yourselves who sit and learn Torah. And learn Torah because it's Hashem's Torah. They are the Neturei Karta. They are the ones who protect the world. They are the ones who give the world a basis and strength for existence. There's an interesting episode that happened in the history of the Israeli of Israel. This was in 1956. I don't know if anyone of you familiar, maybe you remember. 1956, there was a war in Sinai. Huh?
9.
You were 9. Okay. There was a war in Sinai. What happens? The Egyptians, they blocked off the Gulf of Aqaba. It was a whole thing, and there was a war because the Jewish, Israel couldn't sustain this. They went and they bombarded. During this war, any war, I learned like Israel, everybody's involved, and there was a universal draft. Everybody had to come. Ben Gurion, who was the premier at the time, Prime Minister. Ben Gurion was not a tzaddik. I mean, maybe he has chusim for other reasons, but he was not a tzaddik in terms of learning Torah. Very far from it. Very, very far. And yet, when it came to this conscription, he had a feel, because he came from the old town, he had a feel, says, don't call the yeshiva bochum. We need them to sit and learn now. You believe it? At the time when he was really scared, he was really a dangerous time, and he says, don't call them out, leave them. That's the time we need them to sit and learn. He was a man who relied throughout his lifetime on natural means. He was a Zionist politician, completely devoid of Torah. When we came down to it, he says, don't call out the yeshiva. There's a certain sensitivity that you get when you are really up against the wall. And he said, that we need them. So he here have to understand. We're learning like Gadim, so to speak. We're learning with new things that we don't know anything about. But we have to understand we're learning it not as really as Gadim, as outsiders. We are part of the Torah, we're part of the world. The Tosha. Everything that we do here has definitely effect on the whole world. When a Yid declares and understands a true concept that comes from the Torah, he gives the world a basis for existence. When he learns Breishis Bora Elokim Hashemayim v'Ha'aretz, he is declaring a reality to the world, saying the world is for real, because God's created it. It's not an accident. It's not a big bang. It's a real thing. God created it. Has a real reason for being. This is the power of the Torah that we learn over here. So we are not in isolation. We are not in a different world. We are teshavim, not only teshavim in the Torah world, but teshavim in the whole world. Avraham, before he was able to get Yitzchak, he had to become Avraham, because that's what the function of Yitzchak is. To build the whole world. So, as we always do, the Rebbe should give you strength and open your minds and hearts that the Torah you should be able to absorb and swallow it easily. It shouldn't get stuck in your neck, in your throat, and someplace giving indigestion. You should go through, and you should be absorbed, and it should give you sustenance, give you moral and spiritual strength, and thereby, as we said, certainly, the world today, I have to tell you, you have to be involved, but the world today is really, really in a very, very precarious state. Precarious. You know what precarious is? Probably a very shaky state. Very doubtful. Doesn't have, the whole world is lost its way. Lost its way. Wherever you turn. And we need all the strength that we can have, that we can get. And the strength comes from here and other places like here. It should be matzliach, and with this hatzlacha, you'll be matzliach in the long run in Mitzvah Hashem to establish your own homes and to build the world the way you're supposed to, and fulfill your purpose in life. Have hatzlacha and have a good day, and a good Chodesh, Shabbos Mevorchim bald.
Amen.